Welcome back to Mom and Mind. I'm really glad you guys are here with us today. Our episode is focused on Caitlin Shattuck. She is sharing her personal story. What I think is really helpful about her experience is how she talks about how severe her postpartum depression and anxiety was, yet at the same time, the pressure she had on herself and from society, I suppose, as well, to continue to be as high functioning as possible. She shares about her pregnancy and birth and postpartum with her three children, aged 3, 6, and 8. She is a lawyer and she practiced as a commercial litigator for a long time. And it wasn't until her third postpartum where it became so severe that she needed additional support through an intensive outpatient program that she decided to change her career. She left her job and is now attending Rutgers University School of Social Work to obtain a master's in social work. And because of her experience, she now wants to work with women and perinatal mood and anxiety disorders to help bridge the gap in care. And she felt that lapse in care personally when she suffered from severe postpartum depression and anxiety after her first two pregnancies, and then again in her third postpartum. She talks about her experience of being hospitalized shortly after her youngest son had turned 2, having suffered for many years with even with having some support, but still not having as much of the help that she actually needed. She does also share some of the intensity of her experience, including the suicidal thoughts and feelings that she had that led up to hospitalization. Again, I want to emphasize as well how important it is to be hearing stories from people who look like they're doing fine, but who are actually suffering internally. This happens a lot, and I'm really grateful that Caitlin is sharing her experience with us. So let's meet Caitlin. Welcome, Caitlin. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really interested in your story because I know you did a career change, kind of as a result of your experience. So that absolutely happens for people when there's something so significant in their life that just really changes their direction. So we'll get to, I guess, that point, but yeah, I'd love for you to start wherever you feel comfortable with where your story starts.
Sure. So I guess my story starts about 9 years ago because my oldest son is 8. So we're back up a little bit. My husband
Mhm.
and I started. We're actually high school sweethearts. So when the time came after life in the city and having fun, we decided to start to think about having kids.
Mhm.
Few hiccups, but pretty straightforward. I definitely had an anxious pregnancy,
Mm,
and anxiety wasn't something I'd really experienced before or been able to identify, but I didn't really think much of it. The usual, oh, did the baby kick? Did I eat the right thing? Did I
mhm,
do that? And, you know, healthy pregnancy, nothing to really complain of. A pretty healthy delivery. I'll get there. But
mm,
from the minute my son was born, I knew something was wrong, but not wrong in the
mm,
sense of I know what this is, but just this overwhelming sense of dread, panic.
mm.
But I thought, well, I guess that's just motherhood. I don't know how to change a diaper. This baby doesn't know how to feed. I don't know what to do.
Right.
The hospital telling me, feed him right away, hold him right away. He had a high belly Reuben count, so they were very, very adamant that I feed him, I pump, I feed him, I pump.
Mm,
They kept him in the
mhm,
room with us while he was under the lights. So all of that, I couldn't change his diaper. My husband had never changed a diaper, but neither had I. But I was
mm,
panicked, constant panic. And then in addition, every time they'd come in the room, they'd say, can you pee? And I'd say, I'll try. And time and time and time and catheter in, catheter out, I couldn't pee. So they kept saying, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. We'll just try again tomorrow. We'll try again. We'll try again. So ultimately, the day comes for us to go home. And 2 days of the hospital, I'm like panicked in tears. Our son is still under the lights. I'm so afraid to go home. So I convinced them that we should stay another night because
Mm.
I still can't pee and
Mm.
baby still has a high bilirubin count.
Yeah.
So we stay an extra night, mostly because I was afraid to go home.
Yeah.
And I even remember the pediatrician saying to my husband, keep an eye on her, make sure she's okay. Like but this can happen. So lo and behold, we leave, and I went home with a catheter, which was okay, but didn't add to my. It just added an extra layer to the newborn
Yeah.
um, stress. And my husband kept saying to me, "Why are you so upset? This is what you wanted. Like we finally got everything you wanted. Aren't you happy?" And I wasn't. I was less than happy. Not happy at all. Plus,
Yeah.
I also had to carry around a catheter, a
Mhm.
bag,
Mhm.
which took, so just from the beginning though, I just turned inside and thought, well, this is motherhood. I guess I'm so tired. I'm upset. I don't know what he needs, constantly checking if he's breathing. I even cried on the car ride home thinking, is he breathing? My husband's like, you're sitting right next to him. And I'm like, I know, but I don't know. Like, I don't know. Can you check? Just having no confidence. Again, I thought all of that was just general. So ultimately, I wound up having to go to the urogynecologist and self-catheterize for 6 weeks.
Wow.
And all the time, everyone kept saying, "Oh, it'll be fine. You'll be able to pee. It'll be fine." I'm like, "Well, I guess, but this is really inconvenient." So
Yeah.
that stress on top of the baby for about the first 3 months. So I was on maternity leave, was a commercial litigator, had been at the same place at that point for about, I don't know, 7, 8 years. And so left, took 6 months of maternity. I cried every single day for the beginning,
Mm.
asked my husband to stay home.
Mhm.
And he didn't fully understand and kept saying, I have to go to work. This is your job. Like, what do you want to do? Why aren't you doing this right? And I don't
Mm.
understand. And
Mm.
so panicked about everything from sleep and the baby sleeping, obsessing about the sleep schedule, the life schedule, the feeding schedule, constantly worried about breastfeeding. Is he getting enough? But then, I was very obsessive about sleep, and I was insistent that he had to sleep for a specific amount of time. And then the wake window had to be specific. I read every book under the sun.
Mm.
And then I kept saying, how do I know when he's tired? How do I, and my husband, I would call him at work and he's like, well, I'm not there. Figure it out. Um, so ultimately, things were not going as I had envisioned. But again, I thought
Right.
it was just motherhood. And
Yeah.
then, I kind of started to know something probably wasn't right, is that I would sometimes lie in the bathroom and just think, I wish I could just could I just break this mirror and slash my wrist? That like
Mm.
really, really dark thoughts. But I didn't share them with anyone because
Mm.
I was terrified of,
Yeah.
are they going to take my baby? Every time I'd go to the pediatrician or my OB, I'd cry, but I would just brush it off as, nah, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Mm.
I was a high functioning, I guess, depressed and anxious mother, but I could
Yeah.
play it off. I could pretend I was fine, just like the best of them.
Yeah.
So, I finally, though, did start seeing a therapist and a psychiatrist, started taking medication. Probably my son was about 9, 10 months, but still very, very dark thoughts a lot. Still no understanding fully of postpartum depression or anxiety.
Like there was no relief from medication or therapy at that
Um,
point.
I think there was some relief from the medication. I mean, I certainly tried a bunch of different ones,
Mm.
but there wasn't like a great relief. And the
Mhm.
therapy, I mean, I think part of it was that I wasn't always totally honest because I still I didn't even with my own therapist feel that comfortable disclosing how I felt. I just
Right.
felt this intense shame, stigma, worry. I guess I was mostly worried that if I tell someone how I really feel, they'll say I'm not fit to be a mother.
Oh gosh.
Um, so I didn't, disclose that much. And my husband, while he was understanding. I think we'd never dealt with like a depression or a mental illness
Right.
before. So both of us were blindsided.
Right.
And, he was like, well, can you just get over it? I'm like,
Ah,
I don't even fault him because it was like, I don't know. He didn't know what's happening. Neither did I. But I also had in my mind that I wanted a second kid, despite all of this. And I had it in my mind. I was gonna have it at, this is when I want to have a second kid. And my husband's like, "Are you?" Our oldest was about 1, and at that point, I had been on medication and did start feeling a little better. I wouldn't say I was, I still had, very dark thoughts at times, still engaged in, a lot of destructive coping mechanisms, some self-harm behavior. And I think the reason I started self-harming was because I previously, throughout this whole period from his birth until now, had very strong, at times, suicidal thoughts. And so
mm,
self-harm became sort of a way to make sure I didn't do that, but to
mm,
cope with it in a destructive way, I
mm-hmm,
suppose.
mm-hmm.
Um,
It's
so
really
even
difficult. That is also, um, you know, I imagine who you telling about that.
right,
It's one
no
of those
one.
things that's like super, it feels like super secret.
Yes, yes. And so
Mm-hmm.
at that point, I was better at opening up to my therapist and my
Mm,
psychiatrist. So they sort of monitored and helped me through that. But yes, I was, that also, I think, contributed to a lot of my going inside and not talking about how I really felt.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but I was convinced that, I want to have another, and yeah, maybe it was to do a better job or to have a different experience.
Mm,
So, um, that time, we got pregnant really easily. Could say we were barely even trying, but I had it in my mind. I wanted to do it. And, I was fortunate that I had the support system. I then had a therapist and psychiatrist who monitored me. I had a lot of back and forth about staying on medication. I
mm,
felt a lot of guilt surrounding that. Even though, I was told it was okay, I felt terrible and awful during the pregnancy that I had to, take something that I thought was more harmful. Everyone reassured me it wasn't. It took me a long time to grapple with that.
mm-hmm.
Um, my second son is 2 years and a couple days older than my first. So 2 years in, and lo and behold, postpartum depression comes right back.
Mm.
This was not a different experience. Maybe it was different because I knew where to turn a little, and I
Oh,
had support system,
yeah,
and I had a therapist and a psychiatrist watching me.
right.
Um, Still couldn't pee. I had the
Oh
same
man,
I had the
really?
same thing happen. It wasn't quite as long. They knew it would probably happen. So, but yeah, the same feelings of, suicidal thoughts, self harm, all of the above. I adjusted my medication here and there, but never felt 100% at all. Still didn't feel great. I had periods of feeling okay. Went back to
Mm-hmm.
work as a commercial litigator, took 6 months off. And again, I put on that I was the high functioning
Mm-hmm.
mom with postpartum depression. No one knew. Um, Maybe my family, a little bit, a friend or two, but nope, I'm perfect. My kids are perfect. I'm
Mm-hmm.
perfect. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
litigator. I can do it all. I'm posting away, like the
Right.
best of them.
Right. So like
Um,
that's like living two lives in a way. Just, your outward facing life and then feeling, I assume, having to hide all of the rest of how you felt and
yes.
mhm, from
Um,
everybody.
yeah, I hid it from everybody. And I felt such shame and
Mm,
stigma, like I couldn't speak up. And I mean, at that point, maybe I was less worried about, someone will say, "Oh, you're a terrible mother. I'm taking your kids." But I would always say to my therapist, "Well, like, how can I be a lawyer and a commercial litigator and have 2 kids and also tell everyone how depressed I am and that I suffer from severe postpartum depression, that I feel suicidal, that I engage in self-harm at times? Like, how can I tell someone that?" Um, and I could never like I just wouldn't budge. I couldn't do it. And I remember she would
Mhm.
tell me, you should, you might benefit from these other therapy programs, maybe DBT therapy. And all I would say is, I don't have time for that. Who has time for this? I don't have time for that. I don't have time for any
Mhm.
of this. I have
Mhm.
to do my job and have kids. So I did start to feel a little bit better. At times, like I said, it was waves, up and down, always. Like I never had full relief
Mm.
for long periods. And then I decided to have a third
Mm.
kid. You might question why. And I don't know, because it was just in our life plan. My husband wanted three. We kind of wanted three. Um, so 3 years later, I had a third boy. And that time I didn't have quite as much depression and anxiety after having him. It felt a little different. And
During
then
pregnancy was
I
difficult?
always had, no, I mean, but all of my pregnancies were healthy. I did have a lot of anxiety
Mhm.
of,
Mhm.
did the baby kick? Did I eat the wrong thing? And maybe each time it got a little less. But definitely, enough anxiety that in each pregnancy, I certainly, went to the hospital saying, I don't feel the baby kick, or a lot
Mm.
of
Mm.
anxiety
Mm.
surrounding that. And even such anxiety that when I'd go to the appointment at the OB, I'd leave and I'd feel so much more anxious. And I'm like, oh, I waited 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it was to hear the baby's
Oh.
heartbeat. And then I'd leave and be like, well, wait, maybe I didn't really hear it. Or I'd be Googling,
Oh
is this heart
gosh.
rate okay? Is this blah, blah, blah? And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I didn't ask this question.
Mhm.
Um, or I never felt that relief. I would wait.
Yeah.
I would get so anxious and built up going to the appointment. Even when you go to the scans and all of the screenings would come back normal, I never felt better. I was always like looking for something else.
Mm. Mhm.
So then I had my third in October 2019. And then 4 months later, COVID
Mhm.
hit.
Mm.
Um, so, we had no childcare. We had three kids. I had gone back to work for the third time as a
Mm.
commercial litigator. And life wasn't terrible. All things considered, it was okay. I think sometimes in those instances, like when you have no choice but to
Mhm.
survive, like
Mm.
that's all.
Right.
Looking back now, I have no idea how we had a five, a three, and a zero in our house, and homeschooled, and both my husband and I worked. We had no child care. We had nothing.
Right.
Um, so I think we had to band together during that period, and then it took until like everything sort of easing up a bit to maybe be able to process what had happened and be like, you know what, I'm really not okay. But I had no
Mm.
choice during that period because
Mhm.
I'm in like pure survival mode. So then about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, I found myself back at work, three kids, and the pandemic resurging.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
I still suffered from anxiety and depression. It all started as postpartum depression at that point, whether, it was postpartum, just general depression. Who knows when the postpartum period ended. Work was stressful, COVID was stressful, the holidays were stressful. Everything was just like a culmination of maybe all those feelings I'd had
Yeah.
for the past 8 years. And I still didn't tell anyone.
That's a
So,
long time to suffer.
right. And so I didn't tell. And like I said, I had there's plenty of periods of joy with my kids and times of
Sure.
feeling okay. But I worked very hard to put on this facade.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it was the day after Christmas. And I had a complete panic attack, extremely suicidal, um, didn't know what to do. And that was the first time where felt like really, I might not be okay. I mean, there have
Mhm.
been many times I might not be okay, but that was the first time I was like, I'm not okay and I don't know what to do. I have
Mm.
to call for help.
Had
So,
you had the support of your therapist and psychiatrist
yes,
through this? Okay. Mhm.
yes, yes. And I talked about things in more generalities. And I remember I was sitting in the bedroom, and it was the day after Christmas and the stress of the holidays. My family had just left. We had hosted, which, only added to I remember and my husband and I were actually kind of in a disagreement about something about the holidays. And I was like, I need his help. And I told him, I was like, something's wrong. Like I feel like I'm very at risk of suicide. But I feel like not just like, oh, I have these thoughts in my head, or oh, I'm going to self-harm. I was like, something's wrong. And so, he was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And I said, I'm going to call my therapist. So he called her, and I talked to her for a few minutes, and she was like, you need to go to the emergency room right now. Of course, I can't go to the emergency room. That's going to ruin my life. And everyone has COVID.
Right.
And and I remember she said to me, you probably won't die of COVID, but you will die of suicide. So I'm either calling 911 and you can
Mm-hmm.
have an ambulance come to your house, or you're going to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, still, like, I guess at that point I was so in such a bad state that I actually didn't think so much about like, what are people going to say? What I was like, okay. So my husband, we got to watch the kids. My husband took me. The line was out the door of
Oh.
everyone had COVID. And she's like, just put me on the phone with the triage, just put me on the phone. And so I said, okay. And probably everyone there hated me because I cut the line, I guess. But I was
Mm.
in such a bad state that they took me in right away. They put me in a room. And I don't know. I mean, it's sort of a blank as to like, I have no idea where I was, and all I could remember was I think I was in like the holding cell for we don't know what to do with you people, because
Mm.
I could hear police outside talking to other people. I could hear some people yelling and screaming, and they had taken all my stuff.
Mm.
So, which makes sense in retrospect, but I remember I was like, I don't have my phone. I don't know how to call anyone because
Mm-hmm.
I I only had a few numbers like memorized in my
Oh,
head
oh,
from
yeah. Who knows
childhood. Who
anybody's
knows what
number?
their numbers are anymore?
Yeah.
So I said, can I have my phone? Um, and I remember I called my mom, but I still was like ashamed to say, I think I'm going to kill myself. So they took me to the hospital. So I kind of was just like, I don't know, I'm here. I'm like having a panic attack. And my mom called my husband, a few people, but I still was like a little bit thinking like, oh my gosh, what am I going to tell people?
Mm.
And or I don't want to be here, but I knew I had to be, and I knew I did in
Mm-hmm.
some ways. So they came and took an assessment, and those memories of that are very fuzzy.
Yeah.
But and then I remember them saying, "Well, we want you to go up to the fifth floor. Will you voluntarily go there?" And I said, "Well, let me talk to my therapist." And I called her, and she was like, I think that's what you need to do. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
need to go to the psychiatric floor. And so
Mm-hmm.
at the time I agreed, and I said, okay. And yet at this point, I hadn't eaten anything. It must have been 12 hours since I had, gone to the ER. And then I
Yeah.
remember lying in like the middle of some floor because I couldn't be left alone. So but they didn't have a place for me yet. So I
Mm.
remember I was like, okay. And I could hear like things going off. I could hear people talking about me.
You feel kind of
But
like detached or
yeah,
disconnected? Okay.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
I definitely was like, I hear people talking about me. I'm lying in this bed. I don't really know where I am. This isn't really
Mm.
happening.
Mm.
Um, and I had spoken to my husband, and he was kind of just, what's going on? Where are you? What's happening? And I was like, I don't know. I think, I'm trying to figure it out. I don't really know. And then ultimately they took me up to like, the locked psychiatric floor. And the minute I got there, I was like, nope, I don't want to be here.
Mm.
Absolutely not. Like, well,
Mm.
I didn't say I would go here. Absolutely not. And the psychiatrists and social workers, he's like, well, you can sign a 48-hour hold, but you have to stay here for 48 hours. I was like, absolutely not. You lied to me. Nope, I'm going home. Like, I do
Mm.
not want to be here. Absolutely
Mm.
not. And they were like, okay, sign this, but like, too bad. And I was
Right.
like, livid.
Yeah. So now
Because
now it went from a voluntary uh a hospitalization, I guess, to involuntary.
Well, yes. I mean, it was the floor at the hospital ward, so it still was voluntary. But I guess once you submit to that, they have they can monitor you for 48 hours and
Mhm.
release you if you request, but you can't leave within 48 hours. So I kept saying, "You tricked me. I can't believe you did this to me. You told me I could leave." So I then I was shadowed by someone because I couldn't be left alone. I refused to eat. I was sharing a room, but then they were like, fine, we'll give you your own room if that'll make you feel better. I'm like, nothing will make you feel better. I'm going home
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
now. And I think still that was now, even though I'd been into such this state and I still felt it, I was like, I can't be here. I don't want to be here either. Again, I'm ruining my life.
Mm.
Not recognizing the severity of, well, I actually agree, suicide or really dark thoughts could ruin your life too. So it took me a little while of speaking to the social worker, my therapist, the psychiatrist there. And I think I finally agreed that I would stay while they figured out, what would be the best option for me.
Mhm.
And I calmed down a little. They obviously gave me medication to help me calm down, I suppose. And definitely calmed down a little. I think saw things, the dark cloud maybe cleared a little and thought, okay, these people are here to help. Like I shouldn't be angry and mad at them.
Mhm.
They're just trying to save my life. So ultimately, I wound up staying just for 3 nights. And, just to make sure that I was safe. Um, they took, obviously when I got there, they still took my phone, they took my clothes, they took everything. You couldn't even wear the mask with like the little metal
Mhm.
pieces. So they gave you another one.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, I still was super ashamed. The only person besides my family, I called my best friend from childhood, who's still my best friend, because she's one of those phone numbers that like you
Mhm.
still remember.
Yeah.
I called her from the hospital. How are you? I was wondering, my messages weren't going through, and I told her. Um, so she was like the one support I had outside of my family. And then yeah, I came home. I took a leave of absence from work. I had left my desk with 1,000 papers.
Yeah.
No, every time I've gone on maternity leave, I at least kind of closed my cases, handed
Mhm.
things off. This was just,
Mhm.
and I felt horrible. And I remember my coworker though. I had just told everyone at work like, I'd been hospitalized, but I didn't give I just said I had some issues. I don't even
Mhm.
remember. It was very casual. And
Yeah.
yeah, so then actually couldn't have been nicer. He's like, don't worry about it. I already went through your stuff. Like, we'll take care of it. And I was like, yeah, I'll be back soon. Don't worry. I'll be back soon. Um, they put me in a outpatient IOP, and it was actually a DBT program, which is what my therapist had told me I would have
Mhm.
benefited me years
Mhm.
before,
Mhm.
and it changed my life. Honestly,
Mhm.
changed my life. It was 3 days a week of a group and like an individual. It was virtual because it was
Yeah.
still
Right.
pretty COVID-y, and it was amazing. It was so nice to be with people. It was not, um, postpartum based or whatever, but it was so nice
Mhm.
to be with people who also, shared mental health concerns. There was no
Right.
judgment. There was no
Right.
nothing.
Right.
The skills we learned were,
Mhm.
easier said than done to implement, but I really felt like it had a course, and, it was, there was things to meet and homework to be done and things like
Mhm.
that. And so I had it fully intended. I got, I think about, the program was supposed to be about 3 months or depended, and I actually stayed in a little longer because I had taken a week off and then readmitted.
Mhm.
So I had fully planned after 4 months to go back to work. I told my boss, I just I'm taking some time. I had some personal issues
Mhm.
going back to work, and he was like, great, just let us know what you need. Like, could not, I'd worked with him for so long that he was like, this is great. What you need, whatever you need. I didn't even really disclose though. It was like mental. I'm just like, I'm taking a little bit of personal
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
Obviously I got a note for disability.
Yeah.
No one still 100% like knew exactly what had happened. And I don't know. One day I was like sitting in the class or the DBT program, I loved the social worker who ran it, and I remember thinking like, wow, I feel like I could really help people, not because I'm so great, but because like, wow, she's doing such a great job of helping all of us. Like,
Mm,
there's so much more I could be doing in my life, and
mm,
that night I sat down and was like, I think I want to get a master's in social work. And I looked up the requirements. This thought had never crossed my mind before.
uh-huh.
And I looked it up and I was like, let me see what I even need to do. And I wrote my personal statement fully on how I want to, you know, bridge the gap in maternal mental health, erase the stigma and shame, all of the things that I felt.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
um, yeah, and like when I told the social worker who was working, she's like, that sounds amazing. And then I remember I told my mom, and she was, who also was a lawyer, and was like, oh man, I wish I did that. That sounds amazing. And I was like,
Mhm.
my husband maybe had a little bit of different initial reaction, but ultimately
Yeah.
was on board. Um, yeah, and I developed this extreme passion in there's such a gap in care in like maternal
Yeah.
mental health. And I always say if someone had watched me 9 years ago and like even the anxious pregnancy I had,
Yeah.
maybe would have noticed that like I was losing my mind.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. I mean, that's but just for people, just for reference, people who are listening, IOP is intensive outpatient program and DBT is dialectical behavior therapy, which, works for so many people for so many reasons. Um, but in your experience, it sounds like this was in the IOP program one of the first times you felt like deep relief, or like
Mm-hmm.
that you had some help and support along the way, but it didn't sound like it like fully um helped or got to you the way that you needed in this deeper way.
Yes, I think that I mean, look, I credit the doctors who saw me along the way with
Sure,
helping,
sure. Yeah.
but I think something about this also got deeper because maybe it's what I needed was the group setting too, of being like,
Mm,
okay, this wall of stigma and shame I have, I can drop here. And
mm,
these people are all suffering, varying, with mental illnesses, and there was no judgment. And even though, of course, my therapist, my psychiatrist, there's no judgment, I still felt in the outside world like I had to bottle it all up.
mhm.
And so, yeah, it was like the first time I even in my personal statement, I was like, it's the first time I feel like my mental health journey really almost began, or
Mm,
because I finally like let down. I was forced to. Like, I went to
mhm,
the hospital. I almost
mhm,
killed
mhm,
myself. I was
mhm.
forced to like let this wall down. I had no choice, and
Yeah.
so like if you had asked me, well, you take a leave of absence to do a therapy program from work? Are you kidding me? Absolutely
Yeah.
not. Absolutely not. How would I do that? I have my caseload. I have
Right.
court. I have to go to court tomorrow. I
Right.
have that. Of course. How can
Right.
I fit this into my schedule? I have
Right.
3 kids. But I remember though I called my boss, and it was kind of around the time I was like I've been about 4 months. I think he thought I was calling to say, hey, I'm like getting ready to tell you plans about coming back, and I had decided I needed recommendations to apply to school, and I've worked for him for so long, and I didn't want to apply behind his back.
Yeah.
And I called him and I said, I was like, hey, I have something I want to tell you. I'm going to apply for a master's in social work. Will you write me a recommendation? And I remember he was in the airport and he said, well, I'm proud of you, but this is the most shocking thing I've heard all day. He's like, and I said, you know what? Let me send you my personal statement. It will like let you know why I want to do this. And it revealed that I had been in the hospital, that I had postpartum depression.
Mhm.
And I remember he called me and was like, of course I'll write your recommendation, but why didn't you tell me any of this? And
Mm.
I was like, I couldn't. I just like couldn't. I don't know. Um,
Right. I mean, there's that throughout your story, I'm hearing like how intensely focused you were at trying to be on your career and remaining professional and keeping up the whatever life and appearances and all of that stuff, and just how important it was for you to do that at the same time. um wow, this is so much energy. It takes so much energy to do that while you're suffering. But
Right.
there was like that part of you that was just like, nope, we're gonna keep doing this. I'm gonna keep on keeping on. Um,
Yeah, it was like my coping mechanism in some
mhm,
ways. I mean, even
mhm.
still today, when I suffer from some depression and anxiety, people still say to me, "Oh, you're so high functioning." I'm like, that's like my default coping is to like
Yes.
layer it all on and pretend all is
Mhm,
okay. And
mhm.
then, those house of cards crumble eventually. You can't sustain it forever. But I'm still pretty good at pretending all is okay. But that's not what I want to do anymore. Is that I don't think you should,
Yeah,
I have to practice what I preach. So my goal is in entering the field. So I'm now an MSW, getting a master's social work at Rutgers. I'm in my second semester and, wanting to solely work in maternal mental health and in sort of erasing some of that stigma and shame, which, I think
yeah,
the world is going in a better place towards doing that. But, even recognizing that some of the major reasons that women don't get help is still stigma and
mhm,
shame and
mhm.
lack of resources, lack of access. And there's just this huge gap in care between, I don't fault the OB and I don't fault the pediatrician because it's like not really their job is to, deal with the mental health aspect of pregnancy or relating to anything perinatal. So it's like, where does that fall? And I see it today, even at my internship, working with at a agency that deals with perinatal mental health, and it's like they get a number, we call, there's a wait list, we have a wait list, and then sure maybe that was the person's one moment where they called and they're like, nope,
Yeah.
I'm shutting this back down agawn.
Oh, yeah,
um,
yeah.
and there's just nowhere to turn. Lack of resources, lack of access, insurance. There's just I'm not going to be able to save the world, but I hope I can make a little dent in awareness, um, of postpartum depression and
Mhm.
maternal mental health is just so important. So that's what I did. I left my job, uh, left
Yeah.
that whole
Mhm.
like 14-year career behind me.
Yeah, that's a massive change. But yeah, that's it's like it's a good stress, but still stress. For sure. So I what I think is I'm really grateful for you sharing is just how high functioning you were while you were severely depressed and severely anxious. Because the picture that people have of what severe depression and anxiety looks like is that you're incapacitated. And eventually you got to a point where you were, but for I use 8 years, 8 years, and the time took a toll on you as well. But that's what a lot of people look like. And it's not that you're just in a dark room, like under the covers, although that happens for sure, um, or that you can't function at all, even with however anxious you might feel. Again, that does happen and can happen. But this is particularly important because of the pressure that women have on them to, do all, be all, um, and pretend like you're fine when you're not. I mean, we got to blow that up and let's say no, that's not going to be a thing anymore.
Right. Right.
um, I mean,
No,
there are
it has
certainly
to be.
reasons people learn how to cope in high functioning ways. A lot of people do. Um, but man, if there had been a different, you can't go back and erase and change things, but if interventions or things were offered to you or things helped in a different way early on, you wouldn't have had to suffer for 8 years.
Right. I totally agree. And I think I maybe would have been more receptive to care if it was, or even doing the DBT program 8 years ago, or whatever, or if that was what was recommended. I was so afraid to speak up at work. Not that I'm faulting the people I work with, I didn't tell them. I mean, but I was a commercial litigator in
Mm-hmm.
a group of all men. And I was going to tell them I have this postpartum depression and anxiety. And then, I already had felt, which that coming back as a mom was already hard enough. And then
Mm-hmm.
coming back as a mom twice and three
Mm-hmm.
times that,
Mm-hmm.
um, would I be cut out for it? Would they think I needed to leave early? Would they think I couldn't do it? Would I get passed over for things? And so, yeah, I mean, I guess if there's even been more awareness or discussion at work or, mental health, I was lucky that I got disability at my office, but a lot, even the phone calls I had to make to the state and do all of that were atrocious. And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
sitting here, I remember saying to my HR, you know, it's a lucky thing I can like survive without this paycheck that's taking many, many more weeks to get. Then like it's not my company's fault, it's the state's fault. And it was like, because otherwise, like, what do people do?
Yeah.
They who need this. And so they're just like, I was fortunate in that regard. And I was also fortunate, even though I didn't get, is that I could pay for mental health services
Mm-hmm.
at various different times, having to pay for things out of pocket. So even with all that in my favor,
Mm-hmm.
um, I still struggled.
Mm-hmm.
So, it makes
Right.
me think about other people who don't have, like, aren't privileged or have the
Mm-hmm.
access. And so it's disheartening. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, if it was, and like you said, it's become more people are speaking up. But I think I just had this picture in my head of a mom of three commercial litigator. Like I spent my whole life trying to be perfect or get it all done. And now what I'm supposed to say, I have a mental illness.
Mm-hmm. I think that's something I have seen um, a lot for. And when I say like high functioning, sort of high power people who are then experiencing this mental, emotional setback and challenge, um, it. And I don't know if this is your experience, but if it's almost like, oh, I don't want to say harder. How do I want to say it? It's like you're used to being able to set your mind to something and get it done and do it. Um, at, in some ways, in a tenacious way, no matter how much it takes, no matter how hard it is. No, and I'm not saying that other people give up, but there's like some sort of internal pressure and drive, and then you reach something where you can't do that, and it's almost devastating. Like that
Mm-hmm.
you can't just get over
I
it.
always say that pregnancy in general, it's the first time you can't work harder to get something done.
Right.
Like, so
Right.
it's the same thing. So I think a lot of women or anyone who's used to, if I just try a little harder, if I just spend a little more time, if I just do it a
Mm-hmm.
little better, I can control the whole situation. And then you try and get pregnant and you're like, oh,
Oh,
can't
no.
try any harder at this. Like there's nothing else
Yeah.
I mean, sure, there's things you can do, but you literally can't try any harder. And then you
Mm-hmm.
have a baby and you lose all sense of control. And no matter how hard I try, I became obsessed with baby sleep. No matter how hard I try, I can't make you sleep for 47 minutes as opposed to 42. I
Mm-hmm.
can't try
Mm-hmm.
any harder, but I kept thinking I'm doing something wrong. There is something
Yes.
wrong with me. So there's
Yes.
something wrong with me. If only I could fix that, I would
Mm-hmm.
be pregnant faster. The baby would sleep for 47 minutes and not
Mm-hmm.
42. And society perpetuates that because,
Mm-hmm.
every other mom's book out there is like, well, if you just do this, if you just do this. And then I always say to the moms group I run right now, like, they're not robots. These babies aren't robots, but it's like, what do you do if the wake window is 44 minutes, but it was supposed to be 90? And I'd like crumble and fall. I was like
Yeah.
a disaster. I was doing something wrong. It wasn't,
Right.
this child is just a child. It was, I have failed.
Mm-hmm.
So and I don't know how to fix it. So exactly as you said,
Right.
like I can't work harder. There's nothing I can do to work any harder. And that feeling was soul crushing for me. I didn't know how
Right.
to deal with it.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. You said it felt like failure.
yeah, 100% like failure. And perhaps that's why the coping mechanism is to be high functioning in like every other area and just
Mm-hmm.
be like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, this is all the other things I can potentially control. But
Mm-hmm.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
it's a dark and lonely road
It
when
was, yeah.
you don't have anyone to talk to really about it.
At what point, and I know you said early on, it felt like, okay, this is just what motherhood is. At what point did you know or realize or were told or whatever that this was postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression?
I remember calling my OB at about 6 weeks and was like, I don't know, I'm still crying a lot. Like, people say maybe it's the baby blues. And they were a little dismissive and said, well, I can write a prescription if you want, but, I'm like, well, I don't know. That's not happening. Or
Yeah.
what? I'm not doing that. And
Yeah.
then, so I think I just pushed it off as, okay, I guess this is still sort of normal. And then
Mm-hmm.
when I started to, like I say, which I don't recall the exact, but it was probably around like 3 months that then I started having like I said, I would lie in the bathroom and just be like, can I like how can I jump out the window? Can I like
This was
use
with the
I,
first.
yeah, can I split
Uh-huh.
my wrist? Like I need to get out of how do I
Uh-huh.
escape this situation? And I said that's when the self-harm started became a coping mechanism instead, so that I didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Um and at that point so I want to say it was like 6 months that then I started seeing a therapist that a friend had recommended. And I didn't disclose a lot of that total darkness because I was like to her right away because I didn't. And
Right.
probably around 9 months when I did, she was like, okay, I think you should see a psychiatrist as well. And like maybe we can get
Mm-hmm.
medication involved. It was like 6 months that I probably even heard postpartum depression or anxiety. I had been going to a mom's group, um, but I didn't disclose how I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some other friends that I was one of the first sort of, but I had some other friends who had babies at the time or whatever, and we definitely talked about down days and things like that, and just the
Mm-hmm.
general like
Mm-hmm.
hard times of newborns in general. But I didn't like disclose my feelings to anyone. And even not really my husband. I mean, I hid a lot of it from my husband just because
Mm-hmm.
I think he didn't understand either. And like I said, I was just waiting for someone to be like, well, you're a bad mother. How could you have these thoughts? You're done. Uh,
Oof. Yeah. It's like I said before, it's a long time to suffer. It's really hard to be honest with yourself, I think, about how bad you feel.
mm-hmm.
Even though it's weird, like you can know it, you can know you feel horrible. But that like other part of you that maybe is still like trying to cope really hard to just be like, it's okay, I'll just if I get more sleep or whatever, we start to minimize and discount our own feelings. And it's hard to grapple with just how bad you feel and and sort of and not succumb to it, but that's not what I want to say. But um accept get into a point of acceptance that it is just this bad and I do really need this help.
Right.
Because if you've already felt like, oh well, I'm a failure for not being able to figure out all this stuff, um it can it can feel like weakness to admit to yourself that it's really that bad, or another
Right.
failure.
Yes,
You already
another
feel
failure.
bad enough.
Right, another failure. And right, and the feeling bad is my fault. And if I mean, I certainly had the um stereotypical viewpoint of depression prior to going through it of like, can't you just get up? Can't you just get up?
Right.
Which
Right,
is
right, right.
awful. Now I look back and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I used to think that way. And if I
Mhm.
heard about someone else, that well, just get up and deal with it. Or what are you
Mhm.
talking about? Or just I don't know, go for a run. Something that,
Yeah,
if someone said
right.
to me now, I'm like, well, that, I get where they're coming from because they don't understand. And so
Mhm.
that's why even what you said is we have this image of someone like who, maybe is hiding under the covers
Mhm.
as depressed, but then we have a high functioning person, and it affects all shapes, sizes. And that's what I didn't realize
Yeah.
about postpartum depression either, is
Mm,
that it affects, so many different types of people. And it
right.
can, sometimes they're predictors, but they also don't have to be. It can come out of nowhere. Um,
Mhm. So knowing, I guess, what you know now, being able to look back on this time that you had, um, and I'm thinking of the people who are listening to this and listening to your story, who can really resonate with this. What would you have told yourself, and what would you hope for people who are going through this now?
sure, absolutely. Well, the number one thing I wish is that I had been more open. And my story alone isn't necessarily going to make someone. I get how they felt, and I get how they feel if they don't want to open up, but also to recognize that there are like these great resources out there. And so um, there's support groups for women dealing with postpartum anxiety, depression, and some of them are anonymous. I mean, I'm currently a postpartum support international mentor. And so I speak with someone who, she's in the thick of it right now, like I was once. And I wish I had a mentor. Or I wish someone, I felt what helped me was to listen to other people's stories. So, and
Mm,
feel like that also helped me to feel like, even though it would be a stranger, let's say I read a book, helped me to feel like I wasn't alone. I'm not
yeah.
the only person experiencing it. So
Hmm.
I wish I had, you know, looked into more of that, and, looked into the support groups. Like I said, for the group mentality for me is sort of what changed my life, and being
Hmm.
with other people. And there's new moms groups that, not just the new moms group, let's meet up and have coffee, but the ones that like really deal with depression, anxiety. And like the other thing I would tell someone is I wish I had advocated for myself. The OB and the pediatrician, they want to help you, but if you don't speak up, like my therapist always tells me, even now, like she's not a mind reader.
Hmm.
So, and those are safe spaces. I didn't feel safe at the time. I don't know why. I just was so worried that someone was going to think I was a bad person. But the reality is, like, that's a safe space to speak up and tell someone how you're really feeling. And if they say no, I need help, do you have resources?
Hmm.
So, and to remember that you're not a failure. Like I thought I was a failure because I had depression, but in retrospect, would I think I was a failure if I was diagnosed with something else? Um,
Right.
and I'd speak out about it. Probably
Hmm.
I'd say, "Oh, that heart medication really helps me," or, "Oh, I
Hmm.
wouldn't take a leave of absence from work and lie. I'd say I have a heart condition."
Right.
So I think just we need to change the way people view mental health. And I guess my plug for that, it starts with you and it starts with me, is speaking out and telling our stories in the hopes. Exactly. I that's I just wish I had been more open.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a really hard lesson. It's a really hard lesson to learn in a really hard way. That uh oh, man. But yeah, it does sound like you had such a journey and are, literally have changed your life
Mm-hmm.
and your life's goals. Which is, I don't know, I assume being a lawyer is really stressful. I can't imagine it added to you feeling better.
No, it didn't. But you know what? I always say I didn't just. I actually liked being a lawyer.
Sure.
I didn't like. I enjoyed it, but I just feel like I could use my skill set in a different way
Hmm.
and help people. Lawyers help people. I'm just helping
Hmm.
people in a different way. And whether it's that I'm treating clinically or advocating for better care, or,
Hmm.
helping people find resources, this is like a whole area where a lot of help is needed. Like maternal
Hmm.
mental health is at the forefront. Like we need to do something about it. We need to do something about, all these women suffering. So that's
Yeah,
my goal.
absolutely. Well, I know you've helped people just by sharing your story here and sharing your healing journey and your perspective. I know it's helping people.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on and sharing your story and being with us today. Caitlin mentioned in this episode that she is a mentor for Postpartum Support International. They do have one on one support available, including support groups and a therapist directory. So, if any of you are experiencing anything like what Caitlin described, or you're having an experience that you know you need help and support for, there is help available. You can reach out to Postpartum Support International at postpartum.net and be sure to get started on your healing journey. Thank you all for being with us. Until next time.